Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We will learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We will also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening.
Andrew Swindell is a TOGAF qualified enterprise information architect, and with over 20 years experience in the field of information technology and enterprise architecture. On top of the years of consulting experience in enterprise architecture and data analytics, he is also a speaker and an author. Andrew has domain expertise in asset management using technology across different asset-intensive environments. He has previously delivered consulting services and projects in a number of companies, including New South Wales Transport and BHP Billington. Currently, he is helping Origin Energy to move into a modern data architecture and upgrading its gas business portfolio with modern technological capabilities. Andrew does this through applying architectural discipline, engaging stakeholders at all levels, including boards and executive teams, and driving a strong focus on a collaboration and business outcome. Today, Andrew will share with us on how data, analytics, and enterprise architecture are applied in the gas and energy industry. Please enjoy. Andrew, welcome to the Analytics Show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So we have been talking about this for some time now to have you to come on the show, because I find that I think a lot of people are interested of what you are doing as an information architect, and that is probably the type in terms of especially the career a lot of people may want to go there. Could you please start by telling us what do you do and what's the role that you play at the organization you work for as an information architect?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jason. So my role title is Enterprise Information Architect within Integrated Gas at Origin Energy. Now, Integrated Gas is the upstream production of gas. We're part of a joint venture where Origin is responsible for the operation and production of gas, and a number of joint venture partners are responsible for the storage and shipping and completion of contracts. So I guess my role as Enterprise Information Architect, in order to produce that gas, we need to plan wells, we need to have a set of reserves available, we need to gain access to those reserves, we need tenures with landowners, we grid the tenure, we then look at which wells that we want to run with, what are our operating targets, and then we work through the process of creating a well, getting all the equipment together. Obviously, we move towards operations. And then at some point, we will look at plugging and disposing of that well, and there's a restoration process around that. So you can imagine there's a lot of data required that is needed by various business functions to come together. And so my role as Enterprise Information Architect is essentially to provide the guidance around what data we have, where the systems come together. I do a lot of modelling, architecture modelling to support that. 90% of my week is essentially engaging with all the different project teams, business units, technology teams, all the way from the planning function, all the way through to the operations, and making sure that we're generating the results.
Right. So your work is more about engaging with various teams in the project or even the operational team in terms of modeling to understand where the data are coming from and how they would be interconnected and how they would be useful from the business portfolio perspective, that how they can be used to support the business, whether it's monitoring or whether it's analytic or whether it's understand the performance and where you join all the dots together. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a really intricate ecosystem that we have. And so we try and so we're engaging with project teams who are constantly impacting on the data. So we need to make sure they're following the guidelines, principles. They know what impact they're going to have on that data. We're treating data as an asset and we want to manage it accordingly. And so what that means is that project teams, business units, technology teams all really need to come together and understand what data we've got, the importance of that data. We can't just go and create a new value because it has a downstream impact on other teams. So there's a real sort of understanding of that ecosystem and engaging the various stakeholders to protect that asset, because it really is the data that's providing the oxygen for a lot of the decisions we make around our production output and where we're going to drill the next set of wells. We drill one well a day and on average, and we've sort of we've got to make sure that the data is accurate to support the decisions, to support the reporting, and the analytics that go with that.
Right. Couple of questions I want to go on there, but before I go on, in terms of what I was going to ask, I think I probably want to focus on, for a lot of people who are analysts or analytic consultant, and they are aspired to become an information architect, they aspire to become an enterprise architect. What would be your advice to them? What, in terms of the career, how could they work to become an architect?
It's a really interesting question, because it's fair to say that a lot of solution architects, information architects, and the full enterprise architects, almost everyone to a T, comes from a different career point. There's no one path that takes you towards being an architect. But I think one of the early things I learned, I used to be a power user of business objects and Cognos. And so I got to understand the data intimately, how it was structured, where the data quality issues were, what reports we need to create. So I became quite good. I developed a credibility and a level of experience with data. And I guess my experience where I moved up through into the information architecture space, where I was able to create a model of what that data looked like. And then as an information architect, I got exposed to, we've got business processes, we've got applications, and we've also got infrastructure. So that allowed me to start to look at, what's happening at the whole of organisation perspective. Whilst I've maintained that sweet spot of expertise in the information space, I've also been exposed to how does a business come together in business process land, what application portfolio does it run to deliver on those outcomes, how do we store the data, how do we host it, things like that. So I think the greatest advice I can give is to become good at something, and you can start to see where the opportunities and potential is for the organisation within that sphere of credibility that you create. So once you've been able to do that, then you can start, and I think there's a lot to be said for pictures and models to tell the story of 1,000 words. So the more you can simplify a business, simplify the ecosystem, create a view that enables a number of stakeholders to buy into it, I think the more that you start to move into the architecture space. There is some certification training, things like TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, is a really good certification to get, and certainly becoming part of the architecture community where there are constant conversations around architecture challenges. So I think there's a number of things that the budding business analyst, data analyst, and they can move into project manager roles, or they can move into architecture roles. It really just a matter of interest. One thing I do know is that people have so many opportunities available these days. So, and I didn't discover architecture until I was 35. So, I spent a lot of time just gaining expertise and experience and understanding, and I was able to then start to bring together that in an architecture context.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of those people who are in the role of analytic or the business analyst, they certainly will be able to learn the skill sets in terms of like getting understanding and learning about the system. And throughout the time, what they need to learn is about how the business are operating, and also how they can simplify the language, and also using model to tell the story is probably the way they can work towards to become an architect. Would that be a right summary?
It's really good summary, Jason. That I think there's a passion and desire to keep learning. And I've worked at over 30 different companies and got a sense of what works, what doesn't work, how companies manage their assets and how they go to market. And there's certainly been able to package a lot of those learnings into the models I create today, which brings whole business units together around single outcomes. So it's through the use of storytelling and having that breadth of experience has really kept me in good stead. And I'm passionate about learning and read as much as they can.
Absolutely. Lifetime learning is important for anyone. So I was going to ask you what business you are in or what business portfolio you are in that you are working for Origin, but I think you already mentioned it, which is the integrated gas. Could you, for those audience who are from overseas, they probably do not necessarily know who you work for or who Origin is. Try to give us 3 minutes rundown of who Origin is, what do they do, what are the various businesses that they run?
Yeah, sure, Jason. So Origin Energy is an Australian-based company, primarily in the business of gas, providing it's a gas utility. We have a retail customer base. We have an integrated gas group who are obviously responsible for producing the gas, but we also have a fairly significant renewable energy focus as well. So there's been a lot of discussion around the coal-based energy and greenhouse gases and emissions, and gas is obviously a lot cleaner substitute for that. But we're also extending the business model into the renewable energy space so that we're exploring a number of different energy sources to help us with obviously delivering clean energy. So our tagline is delivering good energy. So we have a strong focus within that. And we also have a corporate group that supports both of those two major streams. So a lot of our gas is exported overseas, but we also provide gas for the Australian market.
Right. So Origin is in the retail business of distributing the energy to the retail market, but at the same time, they also have that wholesale market. They also generate the energy through the burning the coal, the gas, and also the renewable energy, which is solar and electricity. And you sit in the integrated gas. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm actually in the technology group for integrated gas. And I guess one of the beauties or benefits of that is that I get to see all the projects. I get to see engage with all the business units. And so we can get to see where things are a little disconnected or where there are opportunities to improve or where certain people need to be engaged and having conversations. So one, we're supporting the change management program through the projects, but also supporting the various business units in how they deliver their outcomes so that they're fully aligned and they're protecting our data as well. So and doing that for my team. If I was in a business unit, I would be more likely to be part of just one part of the business. But I think from being in an information technology space, we can get to see all parts of the business and really sort of help to align and corral and engage stakeholders from both business and technology.
Right. That's great. So in that case, could you tell us some example on how data and analytics are applied in various of the business units in the energy business, like Origin? So what are the areas you utilize the most of the data and analytics, and what other area perhaps is underutilized and there's so much more room to improve?
Oh, we have lots of opportunities, and I could spend a lot of time talking about the opportunities. I guess there's a couple of key opportunities that we have. Certainly, we talk about planning aspects, and so wanting to make sure that all the various elements of the plan. We want to plan our gas production. We need to plan the wells around that. We need to plan the land and the tenures. There's a lot of data inputs that need to come together to support a plan. And we plan short term, medium term out to 2 years, and long term out to 40 years. So there's a lot of data that needs to go into the planning process. So to create that plan. But the second part of that is actually making that plan real. So we need to engage with those business units who are going to be delivering our wells, going to be drilling those wells and bringing all the equipment together. And the third part of that is the operation side. So we need to make sure that if we're planning a certain outcome or performance for the company, that we deliver the wells, but we actually deliver the gas that supports the revenue and the business outcomes we're chasing. So you can imagine there's a fairly significant ecosystem that needs to be managed. And so each of those sort of three major phases, I spend a lot of time talking to each of the different business groups to understand the decisions they make can't be made unilaterally, that we need to engage various different groups to ensure that The definitions are the same, the attributes, the values are the same. We're all singing off the same song sheet in terms of the models. And so that's a business process data application and infrastructure conversation as well. So our operational space, we've got a number of different systems that we feed the operations data. We have real-time data and we have delayed data. We have to store data. We have to master certain data attributes. We have data quality issues like every company. So you can imagine there is just a lot of opportunity to improve the outcomes from managing our data.
Right. So one of the things that you mentioned is the business process. How much time do you think you spend in terms of understanding the business process and understanding the business so that you can tie it back to the information architecture and also tie it back to the data and the analytics? Do you often have a sequence to say, okay, it is about understanding the business first before trying to go and get all the data? Because I see like that there seems to be a few different school of thought where some people prefer just to get all the data and then work out what they can do about it. Where there are people who try to understand the business first and understand what it is trying to achieve, then only to go out and source the data that they need in solving those problems.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We and I'll sort of include even the customers in that space. We need to understand our customers. We are a customer-driven organisation, and in IT, we need to support the business so that they can support our customers. So there's a real sort of life cycle of understanding around what are the customer scenarios, their demands, how do they best use our energy, and then we need to understand how the business comes together to support that. And there's business architecture and reference models. We use a process modeling language that enables us to create value chains, and within those value chains, a series of activities and processes, activities and tasks come together. And in each of those parts of the value chain and the processes requires data. We create it, we read it, we update it, we delete it, and also we have a series of applications that need to come together. And the more we can automate and integrate those applications and the movement of data, the more optimized the process becomes. So you're absolutely correct. The business is always our starting point, and we can then work through what data is required and what systems are available to support that.
Right. So for the industry like energy business, I presume often it is very heavy in the asset that they own. So this includes both of the fixed plants asset, like the gas or the coal, and also the mobile asset. So with the advancement of the technology and IoT device, I feel like it is now making a lot of things that are becoming possible that were not possible before. And it could also do it at a much more efficient cost. And I presume that is similar to or related to the real-time data that you mentioned earlier. Could you please share with us some example in terms of the work currently undergoing for the industry in utilizing the IoT device and how to tie it back to managing the business and the asset together with the data and that it generates, and then be able to use the analytics to even take the efficiency to another level?
Yeah, sure. I guess I've been involved in a number of companies that are asset intensive. New South Wales Transport and Impex Metals and Mining Group, a couple of utilities around TXU a while back, Southeast Water. Within Origin Energy now, very much asset management is a critical outcome for managing our costs and managing the production of gas. We have over 700,000 pieces of equipment that we need to track and have visibility to. We have thousands of wells. We have hundreds of facilities that process the gas. And so the asset management outcomes we need to generate, all of that needs to come together. And the only way we can do that is understanding where the data is, who's in control of that data, how we're using that data and accessing that data. And you talk about IoT, the volumes of data now are incredible. What we're seeing in terms of, certainly in the real-time space, So we have a whole range of sensors on all of our wells and all of our assets, and those sensors are producing real-time data, even in 5-second intervals kind of thing, that we use as a tracking of gas production, of asset utilization, of the heat, the flow of fluids, the flow of gas, the quality of that gas. There's a whole range of data that's coming at us from these new devices, and so we're having to corral that data in a way that will allow us to take the snapshots, drive out business decisions, understand where there's a fail fix kind of scenario. We certainly, certainly in our assets management space, we trying to get ahead of the curve. If we focus on fail fix, we know the downtime of a well is so much greater than if we were able to do some early maintenance and prevent that well from falling over. Then we can have that well up and running and producing at full capacity a lot quicker. So that goes for all of our assets. The more data we have in a way that we can make better business decisions and earlier business decisions, the better we can produce or meet the targets that we've set, and obviously meet the customer needs as well. So it's being an asset intensive industry, we need data. We need to be managing it really well, and it really is the lifeblood of the company.
Yeah, so in terms of the asset heavy company using the data and also some of those IoT device, the whole idea and the objective is basically to prolong the life of the asset and try to be proactive in maintaining the asset before they break down. It seems to be what I see a lot of happening in the mining, energy, and also the asset management industry. That seems to be the ongoing trend. Do you think that is that much more to be done in terms of the IoT devices and the business analytics in the future, apart from just taking the data, attaching the device to those assets? Do you think there is much more to be done in that space, like with the IoT device and also the use of the technology in this space?
Yeah, I think we really still only a tip of the iceberg in what we've been able to. The technology is evolving so quickly, with obviously the GPS tracking and the sensors and the clarity and the granularity of the data now is becoming greater. So certainly, and that has implications all the way through that value chain that I talked about, from the planning and configuration of a well, which we need to optimize, and we need to make sure that the well is constructed in a way that meets the engineering documentation and within the guidelines of the operation of that particular well. And that well is made up a whole bunch of parts. So if we have one of those parts that is overbearing or is taking on more pressure or is being operated outside its configurations, we need to be able to understand and sense that really early, because that's where the break scenarios start to kick in. So we've got to be very mindful of all the way from the planning phase to the configuration phase to the build phase, when we actually drill the well, and then we're obviously operating. We operate certain wells at different configurations, so they all have pressure points. They all have engineering guidelines that need to be followed. So we need to make sure that that information is readily available, so that the decisions can be made prior to a fail fix scenario, that we can get ahead of that curve. So, and we were talking about IoT devices there. As I mentioned, we're just becoming more and more data generating devices for us. So we need to work out how best we can use that data and put it in the hands of the operations team. We have a business control room that literally oversees the whole operation, and so they literally need to have all that information at their fingertips from all the devices, and have all the alarms and the exception reporting created with all the business rules, and understand what response is possible given when each of those alarms go off. So it's a fairly intricate ecosystem that is getting more and more complex with the more and more IoT devices.
In the company like Energy, I presume that is a lot of the engineer. I suppose the question I have then is, how closely do you work with the engineer to understand the engineer perspective of those technical works going on in the background, while also working in the business to understand what the business is trying to achieve for the customer? How closely do you work with the engineer to understand the engineering perspective?
in the works that you do?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The simple answer is we work very closely. We are literally daily in each other's pockets. Engineers have a very unique perspective on the operations and the inputs that go to produce gas. As an architect, we're less inclined to understand the individual intricacies of each and every well. But what we do know is that there is a well portfolio that has a set of processes and data and a set of applications and technology applications to support. So we absolutely need to marry those perspectives and ensure that there is a line of sight between what is actually producing the gas, how we architect it through the business. So because even our most senior executive team have good understanding, but we need to make sure that they're getting the information in a way that they can consume it. If we talk about well number CNN 001 out of 5,000 wells, they're probably less inclined to be interested. But if we talk about the well performance in that particular field or that particular tenure, and there's a drop-off in that particular well gas production in that particular location, then they start to take notice because it's something that it could be evidence of a bigger, broader problem. So we're absolutely joined at the hip with our engineers because we help them, they help us, and there is a very much a middle ground that we need to interpret that ecosystem for them, but we need to also understand, use their expertise to help us position with the architecture models as well.
Right. So working with the engineers because they have the domain expertise in terms of the engineering perspective and how the technicality are working for the business. And your role is to transform some of those information into a simple model and then become almost like the link between the engineering team and the executive team. Would that be?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Right. That's great. I suppose the way that I look at it is even speaking with the engineer is the way of understanding the business as much as they are more in the technical term, but it's still about trying to understand how the business is working and having their domain expertise and having them on board would really help to make sure to be able to build the right architecture and to build the right model in order to run the business. Another question I have is, early on you touched on the gas production and gas utilization. Could you share with us how the data are collected in those two areas and how do you apply the analytic in running the gas production and also the gas utilization?
Yeah, sure. So we have our base operating systems that generate both real-time and delayed and derived data, and we then augment that data and generate reports. And I guess from an analytics perspective, we have a specific digital program of work which focuses on digital or data management initiatives and looking to fill reporting gaps and analytic gaps. But what we're endeavouring to do is not just so much have a digital program that does that, but actually have that as part of running the business. So the analytics and reporting aspects are valid and rich at every stage of the gas production life cycle. So essentially we're taking a platform perspective to that design where we embed specific capability into our business to extract data from the source systems, stage that data. We look at that data and go, is the quality of that data appropriate? Is there any business rules we need to create to support that data, to report on that data? What tools can we provide to our users to enable them to access that data? We also then extend not just the reporting aspects of the data, but we start to look at the data sciences and the artificial intelligence scenarios where are there opportunities for us to model the performance profiles, model the configuration of our wells. That there's so many different aspects to performance that we can look to improve and optimize gas production. So in that space, we then start to isolate certain pieces or parts of data that will answer key questions. And so we're starting to work closely with the business to understand, well, what are those burning challenges for them? And how can we model a response? How can we track the patterns? How can we then understand what's going on in that ecosystem so that we can better manage and optimize gas production. So we take a very end-to-end, holistic ecosystem view of bringing data to life from our source system. So, of course, there's the old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out. We also need to go back to the source systems quite regularly to ensure that the data quality is accurate, complete, valid. We have a number of data quality measures across that. So we've got a lot. You can imagine there's a lot of work at each phase as data moves through, and as we augment it through the models, and we are able to then generate that insight for our business to optimize our gas production.
Right. So in the energy industry, the headline these days often is centered around the power generation, where it is trying to shift from the traditional way where we were burning coal and natural gas, and where it is trying to shift to the renewable energy like the wind or solar farm. I suppose from the retail side of the business, I suspect that the data and the analytics will still remain largely the same. For example, things like the customer analytics, it will still remain the same because it doesn't really matter. It is about understanding how the customer are using and consuming those energy. So I presume those things remain the same, regardless how the energy is created. But I suppose, given of what you're describing about the gas production and utilization, and how the data are collected and analytics are being used to track those things, I presume that form will change quite significantly as we are shifting to the renewable energy production. So I suppose my question to you then is, the use of the data and analytics in the renewable energy, do you think we have done enough to understanding the energy production and the utilization, as in the generating the energy using the wind and solar farm, and how different they are compared to the traditional one like the gas?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that Origin is constantly grappling with, because there is an energy grid across Australia which has a demand profile around it, and we need to ensure that there's not any blackouts and that there's adequate energy available in the system to support those energy needs. And so the balance between renewables and, we're still heavily reliant on coal-based energy and obviously then gas. So between those three key, and the renewables is obviously made up of a number of different energy sources as we evolve the technology. But so when we're managing the energy grid, we need to understand all the different peaks and troughs around that, and what proportions of gas, energy is coming from coal, gas, and those renewables. And so renewables are slowly becoming more and more part of the landscape, which is obviously the cleaner alternatives. And when we get to the information aspects or the data management aspects of renewable energy, the very similar challenges in terms of collecting the data, accessing that data, being able to understand that data and model that data, being able to make sure it's of adequate quality, and then being able to generate the reports. So, and the downstream models from our renewables portfolio. So I think there's a very similar profile from a data perspective. Obviously, when we're talking about customers, we're talking about just different data sets. The base ecosystem is similar, but we are obviously, rather than putting gas production data through that ecosystem, we're putting customer behaviour, customer demand. And instead of talking about well assets, we're talking about wind farms, we're talking about solar panels, we're talking different sets of assets. The underlying data ecosystem is very similar. And so in Australia, we've got some targets, and we are one of the not the cleanest places on the planet in terms of production of energy, and we're also one of the more expensive. And a little bit about our isolation from the rest of the world, but we're highly responsible for our own energy outcomes. So for us to achieve those targets, we're going to need to obviously increase our focus on the renewables, but we need to do it in a staged and managed approach. We can't just go headlong into some of those renewable energy sources. I think you might have heard of some of the issues they've experienced in South Australia where they've moved into the renewable space fairly quickly, but that's created some blackout issues and gaps in their energy production. So it's a very delicate balance in the Australian energy grid to manage the different sources of energy and therefore the data around it.
Right. Thanks for that. That was really useful. And I want to shift this conversation to your consulting background and some of the works that you did before coming into the energy industry. So you come from the consulting background and you also did a lot of work in the finance service company like the NAB or ANZ. But now you focus a lot more on the energy and the asset industry like the mining. What would you say is the key difference in terms of the information architecture, the data and the analytics between the financial and the energy / asset heavy industry? And is there any key difference between the two? Does one work better, do better, certain thing better than the other?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The banking industry, finance industry is certainly subject to far greater regulation and external oversight than, I'll say, the mining industry. The banks are obviously heavily scrutinised and regulated, and when we're talking about money, the movement of money, the whole payments ecosystem, the banks absolutely have to have the strength of their data from its inception all the way through to the analytics and the modelling of customer behaviour. So there are things like the GDPR, which has come out from Europe. There's Basel III, there's Sarbanes-Oxley. These are worldwide external legislation. And we've obviously got APRA here in the finance space who are heavily regulating the banks, what they can and can't do. They have responsible officers who are named in the bank that need to be responsible for certain data. That level of external regulation is not as prominent in the mining industry, and I think certainly, but there's no less need to have a strong data management ecosystem within the mining companies. They need to optimise their outcomes just like any other company, any other industry. And I've been involved in tourism industries and insurance, health providers, things like that. And there is a common denominator. If you're working in data, you've got a bit of a job for life. There is there's so many opportunities to improve a company's management of its data assets. And so I think, but the biggest difference I think is the external regulation. Often a mining company uses the same tools as a banking environment. So they still have to create their data or collect it, collate it, update it, delete it, have it reported and modelled as well. So they have very similar data management requirements. It's just the level of scrutiny, I think, is far greater in banking than it is in the mining, although that's somewhat changing in Australia with the energy and greenhouse conversations now certainly taking centre stage and a lot more public and visible to the communities.
What would you say to the finance industry if that is a couple of things they could potentially learn? They could potentially benefit by learning from the energy / mining industry company.
I think certainly mining and that asset management scenario, I think certainly even though banks are heavily regulated and probably have been having to manage data for 20 or 30 years, becoming a lot more important, I think the asset management life cycle and the approach mining companies take to managing their assets is probably far stronger than the banks, if that makes sense. The banks have financial assets, but they have a lot of physical assets as well, branches and ATMs and kiosks and automatic teller machines and things like that. So I think the management of assets and the insights generated from a mining perspective, I think so banking would certainly, it's still, I think they've become a lot better. They've used a lot more data available around customer behaviour to better position their assets. And obviously, I think both industries have a very acute awareness of the cost involved in managing a fairly extensive asset portfolio. So, but I think, certainly the bank could probably learn a lot more from the mining companies around managing their assets.
That is really good insight that I never really considered or thought much. I suppose coming from the finance industry, often we don't get to see a lot of those physical asset. A lot of the asset is more of the data and the finance asset where you don't really get to see them much. So whereas the mining, those physical things are feasible and you can pretty much feel and touch them. And so yeah, I think you were spot on in terms of the asset management. The mining or companies, they seem to be doing much better, I suppose, as especially that is their livelihood of the company where they have to depend a lot of those assets in order to be able to generate the business and revenue.
Yeah, and the banking industry have gone through fairly significant change. Obviously, 20 or 30 years ago, the branch was still very much a part of people's banking and financial lives, but now it is literally a direct relationship between a customer, their phone, and the retailer. So the need for those assets has changed significantly. So access points are critical for banks. They still need to be visible in the community, but the role played by those assets has changed significantly. And I think will change again. I still think because there's a lot more competition, even some of the bigger platforms are starting to move into the financial space. So, and they don't have the legacy assets, the legacy platforms that the banks are having to deal with based on many, many years of behavior, business operations. So they can come in with an app and all of a sudden become a bank.
Yeah.
And it's a very different operating model and very different level of competition.
That is really good point, especially if we see the rise of the company like PayPal, Braintree, Stripe, how they just dominate the finance industry in the global sense in such a short time span. I think you were absolutely right. In one of the advantage they had is they don't have those legacy system, and they also don't have a lot of the heavy asset like the brand that they always that the banking have to worry about. That's really good point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting development. I was part of ING Direct, who came into Australia, I think it was about 12, 15 years ago, and they were having fairly significant growth curves over their first 2 to 3 years. But we've had Afterpay come on board and have now got millions of customers within 12 to 18 months. And so the time frames Afterpay, whilst they're able to have a fairly significant impact on the payments environment, there's another competitor coming who's going to make it even easier, even quicker, and generate footprints even quicker. So the level of competition in that financial space, and I think there's a basic tenet that he who holds the payments holds the revenues and the fee income and things like that. So the greater the footprint, the greater opportunities for revenue and customer eyeballs and it's a fairly significant battleground at the moment.
That's really good insight. I'm glad that we come to this part of the conversation to understanding a little bit more from the experience and the perspective that you have got in the finance industry. I want to end this interview by asking one question, which is, what is one book that you would give it to your younger self, and why is that?
One piece of advice to my younger self.
Or one book that you would give it to your younger self that you wish you would have read it earlier, say 20 years ago.
Yeah. Look, there's there's been a number of different books that I've been engaged with. Good Companies, Great Companies. I'm trying to remember the author.
Jim Collins.
Yeah, that's it. And essentially he talked about how good companies become great. And I would have read that, I'd say, 8 or 10 years ago, but it's one that has really sort of stood out as every company has an opportunity. And I sort of often do this in my presentations when I presented in London at the European EA conference and the World Architecture Summit in Sydney. Just every company has opportunities, challenges and opportunities, and I think it's being able to draw those out and have visibility and being able to generate a response that is fit for purpose to the customers and the business is the biggest challenges facing companies today. So I think that book sort of set a bit of grounding for me early on that, there's so many opportunities out there to improve the way companies do business. And as an architect, that's how we deliver value. We identify those opportunities, we create the models, we have the conversations, and we direct and guide company strategy and direction in support of that. So that's been a very influential book and how I've looked for value in companies from an architecture viewpoint.
I agree. I think that's a really good book. Just one of the book that I really enjoy. And one of the really interesting that I pick up from that book that stood out for me is a lot of the great company that got mentioned in the book are not necessarily the book that we all know or that we all think that it is the great company at all. It is some of those the company that we may not even have heard of, but they are actually doing a lot of great things. Really enjoyed that book. It's one of those books that I do plan to go back and read again. Now, thank you very much, Andrew, for coming to this podcast and the interview to share your insights and the experience and the knowledge how information architecture is about and how does it get used in various industry, and also share your view, the business of the gas production and utilization energy business and how data and analytics are being utilized in this space. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Appreciate the opportunity, Jason. Thanks again.
No problem. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, take care.